Good morning. I want to bring attention to the battle that uh, African Americans and other people of color are in for voting rights. Using the attention that is being drawn to the Capitol in a joint session of Congress, President Zelensky of Ukraine is boldly speaking about the condition of his country and what they're fighting for. They're fighting for the freedoms and guarantees which come from being a democracy and not an autocracy. And the press was just oozing over President Zelensky coming in, as they said, the uniform of his country, asking for this much needed assistance. And so I decided to put on one of my old uniforms to remind the press that I and my brothers and family before me wore the uniform of this country in the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force since 1863. Our family has been fighting for the freedoms of this nation. And so I don't see Congress, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, President Biden, and the others giving that type of respect to those of us who worn the uniform, not of Ukraine, but of this nation, that we might have the right to vote anywhere we choose, not standing in line 8 hours a day just to vote, not on the laws which make it illegal to give us water as we're forced to stand in lines for long periods of time. You see, if you're gloating and says, well, this uniform, it represents him fighting for freedom and rights. And that's the right thing to do. He's standing there pleading on behalf of his people that they want these rights and freedoms guaranteed by democracy. Well, we are saying the same thing. That's why we wore the uniform. That's why we served this country in times of war and peace, to secure all the rights and privileges of this nation, guaranteed every citizen under the Constitution. But we don't have those. 159 years later, we still don't have voting rights codified in the United States Constitution, the very foundation which guarantees that this government shall be of the people, by the people, and for the people. We don't have that codified 159 years later. So that's why I decided to put on this uniform. I would like to see, by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, voting rights codified. That no bill come before this Congress that does not push the John Lewis Voting Bill Rights Act. President Zelensky says, nothing can wait. Nothing can wait, because everything depends on what they do now for their freedom. And we say the same thing. Nothing can wait. I'm finding it really hard to believe, as I think about my wife and I expecting our first grandchild at the end of this year, early next year. that this child will be born into a country, his country, where his voting rights are not codified in the Constitution. And yet, his ancestors have fought for 159 years to secure those rights. Why is that? It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to this Congress and to this nation that our rights have not been codified in the United States Constitution. And we've worn this uniform and given the utmost for the protection of this nation. Dr. Martin Luther King went to Washington, and he gave this speech on August 28, 1963, before the Lincoln Memorial. And he spoke about the document which should guarantee the rights of all Americans. And he said they had come to present that check to secure those rights. And America wanted to pretend that the Bank of Justice was bankrupt. And Dr. King says, we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. And so we've come again to present that check. And so here we are today, 159 years later, coming again to present that check. And on the face of it is voting rights. We're refusing to believe that this Congress cannot codify the rights of African Americans and people of color in the United States Constitution, while you at the same time saying that we will stand with Ukraine as they fight for their rights against tyranny. He's reminding us of our duty, of our Congress, that they should be standing up for the people of their nations. And so I'm asking President Biden, our commander-in-chief, that he would, by January 15th, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, ensure that the John Lewis Voting Bill of Rights Act is codified in the Constitution. Oh, yes, he can do that. Oh, yes, Chuck Schumer can do that. In fact, Nancy Pelosi can do that in the last weeks of her service. You can do that. And so what I'm, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King says, we're coming demanding that this be done. That from here on out, every bill that comes before the United States Congress will have in it the John Lewis Voting Bill of Rights Act. You have made deals after deal after deal. We don't want to hear anything about Christian cinema. And your friend, Mr. Biden, Joe Manchin, we don't want to hear anything about that. No deals can be made that do not include the John Lewis Voting Bill of Rights Act. Not the budget, not the military budget, not any more money to Ukraine or anything else. This is our demand. And so I'm calling upon my fellow veterans that we as a brotherhood would call for this. We have served together to protect this country against foreign and domestic enemies. It is time that our rights are codified in the United States Constitution, guaranteeing us the right to vote free from all of these impediments which are being put up by various uh, states. It's time for that foolishness to end.